Hey guys, we are going to move on, and today we're looking at ecosystems. So an ecosystem is going to be all the organisms and abiotic factors within a community. So now we're not just looking at the living things, but we're also looking at the non-living factors as well. When you look at ecosystems, you tend to look at two general things. You look at energy flow, so how energy moves through the different trophic levels, and then you also look at chemical cycling, so how matter moves from one part of the ecosystem to another. So I talked about trophic levels on the last slide, and that's going to be a division of an ecosystem based on the source of nutrition or the source of energy. So we have four trophic levels that we're going to look at. So primary producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and then the detritivores. And so if we look at this, it's showing us that all the energy comes from the sun. That energy is going to be used by the primary producers, so they're going to photosynthesize. Um, they get eaten by primary consumers or herbivores. They get eaten by the secondary consumers, and then the secondary consumers will break down or will die and get broken down. The other thing that you guys should notice is that you have these dotted lines. That's going to be energy. So here you have solar energy, and you also have the fact that like some primary producers are going to die before they get eaten, and so they're going to need to get broken down. And you've got energy leaving through heat. And then keep in mind that these blue lines are going to be the movement of chemicals. All right, so notice that energy is only moving in one direction, whereas then the chemicals are cycling back to the primary producers. So primary producers are usually plants. They capture energy and store it in chemical bonds, and these are going to be the source of energy available to an ecosystem. Then primary consumers are going to be the organisms that then feed on the producers, and we call them herbivores. Next, we've got secondary consumers, and these are going to be the organisms that then feed on the primary consumers, and so they would be carnivores. And there can actually be several layers of secondary consumers in an ecosystem. And then the detritivores, they get their energy from the organic waste that is produced by all levels. And so your example here would be bacteria and fungi, and so they sort of help decompose and break things down. Now you're going to hear people talk about both food chains and food webs. So a food chain is going to be the linear path of who eats who in an ecosystem. So you see here we start with the primary producer. Here you got terrestrial, here's a marine food chain. So primary producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, and then quaternary consumer, so just these higher level predators. But then with the food web, this is going to be a network that shows all of the different feeding relationships within an ecosystem. So as the food chain is really just a chain from one to the next, a food web looks a lot messier, and it's got all of the different relationships. So it's sort of like intertwining a bunch of food chains together and seeing all of the crossovers between them. So primary productivity is something that we measure within an ecosystem, and this is going to be the rate at which light energy is captured by autotrophs or primary producers. All right, so we talk about the gross primary productivity, which is going to be the maximum of energy captured, and then the net primary productivity, which is going to be the amount of energy that is going to be left after cell respiration. So just real quick, this is comparing different marine and terrestrial biomes, ecosystems. And so here you've got a breakdown of the percentage of Earth's surface area. So you can see the ocean covers a huge percentage of the Earth's surface area. And then you've got the average net primary productivity, gram per meter squared per year. And what's interesting is you can see that when you're looking at a smaller area, the ocean is not very good in terms of capturing energy, but when you take into account how huge the ocean is, then you can see it really kind of skyrocket. And then in terms of terrestrial ecosystems or biomes, the tropical rainforest is really high up there. All right, so primary productivity and net, looking at net versus gross. So the net primary productivity is going to be the gross primary productivity minus cellular respiration. And then again, you can just look at the opposite. Gross primary productivity is the net primary productivity plus respiration. So just kind of make sure you guys keep that in mind. So available energy Daily is going to be about 10 to the 22nd joules of solar radiation, and about 1% of that is captured through photosynthesis. And it's interesting, at least I think this is interesting, that it's about 150 billion tons of organic matter is created each year from just that 1% of the daily solar radiation. So I think that's pretty good. So primary producers, about 50 to 90% of the gross primary productivity is actually lost due to respiration by the primary producers themselves. So just on them using their energy to stay alive, most of that is going to be gone. So then the net primary productivity is down to 10 to 50%. And animals then can only use the net primary productivity. So it's really going to put a limit on food webs. And so this is just kind of showing you that. So here we've got the 1,000,000 joules of sunlight. So primary producers would be able to get 10,000 joules. That leaves only 1,000 joules that would make it to the primary consumers, then only 100 that would make it to the secondary consumers, and then only 10 that would make it to the tertiary consumers. Okay, so it very much limits how many individuals you can have within a food web or food chain. So limiting factors are going to be materials or nutrients that are not present in sufficient quantity for the primary producers. So things like light is going to be a big one, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, carbon dioxide. Those are all things that the primary producers of the plants need. And so if they are in an environment where they're lacking some of that, their growth is going to be affected. So here you can see we are looking at a control plant in the red. All right. When you add only phosphorus to it, how the growth increases, and it actually decreases a little bit there when you add only nitrogen, but then when you add both nitrogen and phosphorus, what happens to the plant? So when energy transfers from one trophic level to another, it's not 100% efficient. And the reason for that is the second law of thermodynamics. And you need to understand that a lot of energy is going to be lost due to waste and like through materials that can't be digested. So if we were to look at this cute little caterpillar that's eating a plant, what happens is if we say he takes in 200 joules, or there's 200 joules available, 67% of that is going to go to cellular respiration, 33 of that is going to go towards growth, and then 100 joules would be lost in feces. And so essentially you're cutting it in half just by looking at the waste of that caterpillar. So it turns out that on average it's about 10% of energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next. So there has to be fewer high-level consumers in a food web, and then high-level consumers usually need a really large geographical area in order to get all of the energy that they require. So in terms of humans, which would support more humans per area? If we had strictly vegetarian diets, or if we ate meat? And it's actually, if we were strictly vegetarians, we would be able to support more humans. So here we can see if humans were eating a strictly vegetarian diet, so we are essentially only primary consumers, we're getting more energy. Whereas if we are eating meat, then we're the secondary consumer, so we are getting less energy. All right, so your lecture question for today is, why do most ecosystems only have 3 to 4 trophic levels? So I'd like you guys to think about that and send me a message via the class website with your answer. Thanks, guys.